Alright, you know it's Scrawny Life. Big fall river fishing episode this time. Lot to pack in, so let's start right off with Lonicera mackii, the Amur honeysuckle. This is a severely invasive plant in North America. It's native to Mongolia and northeast China. It has the opposite leaves, and each branch always ends with 2 leaves, as you can see. It has white flowers in the spring and produces these red berries in the fall. The berries are eaten by birds, songbirds, and that's what primarily disperses it. And the berries are toxic, mildly toxic to humans. As you can see, it forms very dense thickets. And that is the main problem with it. It shades out native understory plants and wildflowers and results in much less biodiversity in the forest overall. This is what the bark looks like. And it also plays a role in the proliferation of deer ticks, because deer are, making their way through this dense thicket as well. And those are the ticks that carry Lyme disease and other diseases. And I try not to blab too much on the internet about a hotspot that local people may be trying to keep a lid on. So if you know where this old mill house and this statue of me is, then you know where I launched from, and the smallmouth potential of this river is good. Some large smallmouth definitely have been taken here. But this time of year, as the weather begins cooling down, fish generally move downstream toward the shelter of deeper water in the impoundments. And this year especially, since the river level is quite low from ongoing drought, I suspect the larger fish have already moved to the impoundments. But as a fly fisherman, I prefer the shallower bend pools and the intangible aspects of the experience, the flash of water rushing over the rocks and reading the water, the pockets, the current seams and eddies. Also the constantly changing scenery and the absence of other people are all to be found in the flowing part of the river. So it probably won't be a record-setting day, but I'll be grateful for anything the river gives us. And the river has given a small angry pike, which I am quite glad to see. Because it's not uncommon at all during the heat of summer, if it's a drought year, to see dead pike and suckers floating down the river. But this is a good sign, and that at least something has survived the summer. And here in Iowa, that's all we can really ask for. So I am somewhat concerned about the health of the river and its fish, and I've avoided fishing most of the rivers up north all summer. And suckers are just as important as the predatory species. The largest smallmouth and pike and walleye do not chase down tiny minnows. They need bigger, more calorie-dense meals. That's why when you see a gravel run with a lot of suckers on it, the next bend pool nearby usually has a pike or a big smallmouth waiting in ambush. And if a river does not have a thriving population of various suckers, it will not have large bass or pike or walleye. So it's important to understand the difference between invasive carp, which, along with droughts and heat waves, may cause a decline in the native sucker populations, and the suckers themselves, which feed the large ambush predators, as well as eagles and osprey and herons. And I couldn't tell how many suckers were in this pool. I've seen a few small schools over some shallower gravel run. But when I snagged a golden red horse, I figured if they're down there in high enough numbers for one of them to get snagged, that's probably a good sign that a lot of them have made it through the summer. Now this reinforced bend here is close to the boat ramp, and I think some of these small walleyes, there seemed to be a lot of them, and they were just kind of hitting whatever I was throwing in the water, so I think they've probably been recently stocked. And here's another case where if you know where this bridge is, then you know the launch point and what river I'm fishing. Let's quickly look at some microskagit casting. In this case, I'm standing on the bank, so the anchor must be in front of me, and the flow of the river is from my left to right, so the switch cast or jump roll is a natural fit. Here, the trees and brush are immediately behind me, and I'm quite close to the bank, so again, the anchor needs to be in front. I need a little more powerful cast to go a greater distance, though, so in this case, the parry poke is the cast I'm using. But in a single hand context, you want to think of it as a continuum or a sliding scale, with the parry poke at one end and the snap Z at the other end. And so every cast is really a combination of both. As I move downstream a little further away from the bank and a little further away from the trees, you can see the cast begins to look less like a parry poke and more like a snap Z. It's sliding down that continuum. And speaking of sliding, it's important to understand also, since we're so much higher above the water, either standing below a dam on the bank or wading in very shallow water like that, that we're a lot higher above the water, so the rods become shorter, but also we're anchoring further down. I'm only anchoring half of the sink tip, so it's a sliding anchor or moving anchor or semi-blown anchor, however you want to think of it. So yeah, it's a 7 foot, what would be a 6 to 7 weight by AFTM standards rod. And the line is the 200 grain, 12 foot OPST Commando Smooth with a 5 foot sink tip. And the flies need to be designed very sparse. All microskagit casts are roll-based casts, so they're not very powerful casts. You could not do this with the pike flies I was fishing with earlier. So you need to think of like traditional Atlantic salmon flies, how there's a lot of color, but the material is actually kept very sparse. A similar situation here, but in this case the river is flowing from my right to left, and I'm using again a sliding scale or a continuum between the snap C and the snap Z. So I might begin the cast with a very rounded arc, but I might end it by coming much further to the left than the ordinary snap C would. And I'm doing that just to place the anchor either further or either nearer or further away, depending on whether I'm standing on the bank or wading and so forth. So we've got a big fish. What could it be? It looks like a catfish. Big fat channel cat. How do you like that? Bigger than the ones I was catching on the Mississippi. Get in there for that money shot. So there you have it, folks, a microskagit, not just for salmon anymore. Okay, not enough time for a recipe, only a few minutes left here, so let's just look at a few species that I haven't fully identified yet, and sort of the level of detail that you need to be bringing to your observations. This, I believe, is Lacrymaria lacrymabunda, and you'll notice on the overturned cap there, the gills beginning to develop a brown color. Eventually it should produce a fully black spore print. This is from the family Sapphirellacea, and it is a saprotroph that's considered mildly toxic. And here we have Pholiota orivella, or at least that's what I'm going to call it. It's said to be identical to Limonella, except by measuring the spores under a microscope. But for my own purposes, I'm calling everything that emerges from a deciduous tree orivella, and everything that emerges from a coniferous tree Limonella. And these are in family Strophareaceae, and you can see where the caps overlap. The mature caps have dropped a brown spore dust. And these are also saprotrophy. You can see in the tree behind it there's a scar that's been damaged by beetles as well. And now the Pholiota is emerging from that scar. So it could be producing a heart rot in that tree. I'm not sure exactly what sort of a rot they produce. Now, this is an interesting Cortinarius. I believe this to be Cortinarius alboviolaceus, although at the moment it's looking a lot more violaceous than albo. But I think that's just because it's just newly emerging. And you might not think so, but purple mushrooms are actually fairly common. There are a lot of purple mushrooms within Cortinarius, and also in several other families as well. And these have a distinct cortina, or that webby veil that runs between the cap and the stem when the mushrooms are young. The reason I think this is alboviolaceus is because there is purple in the flesh. The context of the mushroom when it's sliced open has sort of a purple look. I think Iodes would just have white. Although Iodes has been positively identified in this park, so we're not ruling that out as a possibility. And some of the other ones like Iodioides and Triganus, we can't fully rule those out either. This I believe to be Russula densifolia. And you'll remember in episode 1 there was a Russula I couldn't identify, but it had a really thick cap cuticle. That probably was densifolia as well. You'll notice this blackening tendency around the margin of the caps and the very densely spaced gills. But the next time I find this, I need to there's supposed to be a staining reaction that develops, but it's slow, so I need to just take time to observe that and probably do a spore print, take a cap home and do a spore print on it.